All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we are delighted to have Kevin Wade with us this afternoon. He's going to be talking about his new book, debut novel called Johnny Careless. And today's actually the publication date, so congratulations. Um,
Thank you.
and let's see, Kevin has signed a batch of books for us. And we don't have that many copies left, however. So if you want one, I would not delay. But I will go ahead and put a link in the comments field on YouTube and Facebook if you'd like to purchase one. And if you have questions for Kevin, go ahead and put them in, and I will come back towards the end of the hour, and I will be happy to ask any questions you might have. So, Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. What a pleasure to meet you, Kevin. I'm raising a glass because today is publication day for Johnny Careless, so I'll have a little toast here. I tried to persuade our friend John Sandford to join me in the Zoom, but he's on deadline. But I have to say that John loved this book and gave it a great pause for drink, a great blurb, which, as I just said to Kevin, John does not do for just any Tom, Dick, and Harry, or he just does it when he really likes a book. So I'm hoping that Kevin is delighted with that.
I was thoroughly delighted and honored that John would not only read it, but say something kind about it. So yes, it was win-win.
Wonderful. So, when we started our Zoom program, I mean, we've been streaming since 1995. Our first stream event was PD James years and years and years ago. But when Zoom came along and the technology went up and we began to talk to however many hundreds, if not thousands of people, I was originally intimidated by people who had such an incredible story as Kevin. I mean, so successful, in Hollywood. And I've learned not to be Kevin. I've learned to just figure that you like
Oh,
any
no.
guy.
I
And
was going to say, oh, shucks, but you're beating me to it. Okay, great.
no, I'm not going to do that. I think they're probably somewhere. Here we go. I can say a few words about Kevin because you won't know him. He is a playwright, screenwriter, and television writer and producer whose credits include the stage plays Key Exchange, Mr. and Mrs. and Cruise Control, and the screenplays for Working Girl, only 7 Academy Award nominations, True Colors, Mr. Baseball Jr., Meet Joe Black, and Made in Manhattan, blah, blah, blah. But he's now in the 14th and final season as a writer and showrunner. I think you're the showrunner too, aren't you, for Blue Blood?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so you have some experience with police stories, police procedurals, if not actually having written a book. But I guess it was natural for you then, if you were going to write a book, to think about writing a police procedural.
It was, though. I'd been a fan of procedurals, police procedurals, detective stories since I was reading adult stuff as a teenager. My dad used to have the Joe Wambaugh books when they came out, which is going back in the last century, but wonderful books by an ex-LAPD guy who turned out to be a wonderful author. Certainly Ian Fleming's James Bond novels, Raymond Chandler, so all of that stuff from the old days. And then John D. McDonald and Michael Connolly and early Dennis Lehane and all of it. So if I was ever going to write a book, my ambition was for that kind of book, especially series of books. But those were the writers I really looked up to and enjoyed reading most.
Oh, I love hearing you say series because that implies you might actually write a sequel to
Uh,
Johnny Careless.
I certainly hope so. But when I had the time, this came. Some of you will remember because there wasn't much on TV. But in 2023, there was a 6-month writers and actors strike, and we were in the middle of our 13th season of Blue Bloods. Yeah, we quit. And had to go on strike, and had spent the previous 12 years on a network broadcast primetime deadline, which is a significant deadline. And about 2 months into the strike, I got restless. And I realized that there were 6 hours a day where I thought I'm supposed to be doing something, and that something was writing, but I couldn't write what I usually did. So I sat down and wrote this. But
And
certainly it came out of the police. That's what was
of
informing
course
it.
it did. Actually, I read something, an interview that you did which said that, desperate for things to do, you were messing around in the kitchen preparing to make something, and your wife came in and took one horrified look and suggested that you probably
That's
should
exactly
go
right.
off to write a book,
I,
right?
I was making cornbread at 7:30 in the morning, and she looked around and said, "You kind of need something to do,
Well,
So,
I think it's wonderful. Now, we have extensive experience with people who are screenwriters, or directors and producers who have written novels. And I mean, not only was there that break during the screenwriters strike, but, Hollywood's changed a lot. And, writing is like a backup career in many respects for all of that. So John Sayles, for example, just has, I think, I'm trying to remember if Patrick can tell us, but anyway, he's just published a second novel.
yeah.
And anyway, and Tom Perry, who did years worth of screenwriting with his wife Jo,
Mhm.
well, after he'd written his first two novels, The Butcher's Boy and Metzger's Dog. Anyway, in a conversation with him on Sunday, I said to him, and I thought about it while reading your book, that it seems to me that people who come from screenwriting have two real strengths when it comes to writing fiction, one of which is you're good at dialogue and you move the story along. So pacing and dialogue, it seems to me, are hallmarks of people who move from screen to print.
Sure.
And it's difficult for many authors to go from writing a book to the spareness of a screenplay. But anyway, I think that Johnny Careless, A, the dialogue is great, and B, you really move it along. So it's a fairly spare book. I mean, compared to many others, you are at 228 or something like that, whereas oftentimes we're floundering around in the 380 page range. So I thank you for that, because I really enjoyed the fact that you got everything you needed to do done within your
Yeah.
pages.
Yeah. It was as what struck me and had me curled under the desk for the first few days was the amount of words to what you're talking about. I have this in front of me for your, I don't know if your audience would have seen, but this is what the page of a screenplay looks like. I'm going to hold that up for just a sec. And same thing for a teleplay and a stage play, which is a lot of white space. You mentioned dialogue. So there's a ton of dialogue, but the story is almost completely driven by the conflict in the scene and what the two people are saying to each other. And you look at a book, as everybody watching this has looked at thousands of books, and it's nothing but words. So that was very daunting to someone who was coming from 40 plus years of writing stage, screen, and teleplays. Um, and once I got past the uh, overwhelming fear of the blank page in this form, what occurred to me was that, and this goes for anybody who's written screenplays or for television or for stage, it's a collaborative effort. And you have a director and a scenic designer and wardrobe and casting, and you have all these roles that contribute to what you see on the screen or on television. And so if you've absorbed that, as I had, and anybody who works in that business, you had a little knowledge of what everybody did. And that's what you do as a novelist. You are the casting director, the cinematographer, the music supervisor, hair, makeup, wardrobe, locations, everything. So once I got past that, it was a little easy, but it took a while to get past that.
Well, I can certainly see that's true. And, novelists don't have the benefit of sets and costumes. So they have to paint with words those things that you don't have to do when you're writing a script, which is why I come back to saying, seems to me that most scripts are, if not mostly dialogue, certainly heavily dialogue.
Absolutely. Yeah, the scripts are you slug in the location, the time of day, who's in the scene, and where the scene is. That's the amount of prose that you write. Everything else is dialogue.
It's great that you've been so versatile and brought it off so well. Did you find, before we talk about the book, did you find that there was a heavy editing process, or did you kind of brush through it?
No, that 228 pages was all I had. There was nothing that came out of it, honestly.
Okay, so you're talking to the person who's heard Don Winslow talk forever about how Sonny Mato whacked, his 2,000 page manuscript down to only 600 pages.
Yeah, I
So,
was going to say Don Winslow's heavily edited because
oh,
he's those are big books. They're great books, but they're big books.
yeah, but that goes all the way back to Thomas Wolfe. I'm trying to remember the name. Patrick will now use the chat function to remind me of his legendary editor at Scribner, who cut God knows how much out of, Look
Yeah.
Homeward Angel or what. So some people write long and have to be edited short. Some people write quite short. But it sounds to me like you were just like that littlest pig. It's just
I wrote short because and I'm sure I know you're aware of it, and maybe many of your viewers and listeners are. The last of Elmore Leonard's 10 rules for writing goes exactly like this: try to leave out the parts that the reader tends to skip over. And that landed with me, and I thought, well, that was sort of foremost in my mind every day. So I was just going, I'm the only reader at this point. I'm the only guy I'm writing it, but I'm also the only guy reading it. And I kind of use that yardstick every morning.
right. And you followed another piece of his advice, which is ditch adverbs, which, now
Yeah,
I'm serious.
yeah.
So Patrick did remind me it's Maxwell Perkins, the legendary Scribner editor for John Wolfe. But anyway, on the first page, chapter 1 of this marvelous book, Johnny Careless, in case you've forgotten the title, um, you're setting up who, in fact, is the police chief, Jeep Mullane. Is it Mullane? How do you pronounce it?
Mullane. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned the fact that his father was an NYPD detective
Yeah.
who loved classic cartoons. And his dad would have described the osprey bird they're observing as having a napkin tied around its neck like a bib and with a knife and fork clutched in his talons. He liked to say, picture the wildlife as people and the people as wildlife. It helps sometimes. And I thought that was really a great way to, start the book and recognize that Jeep can do that.
Thank you. Again, shorthand was trying to describe two things: the protagonist, the main character, Jeep Mullane, and present in his mind was his father, his late father, and his late father was a cop, a detective in the NYPD, and tying that right from the beginning, which to me gave a few things about that we know about the guy. He had a lot of respect for his father. He learned a lot for his father, and perhaps he'd had his eye on being a cop from when he was a kid, looking up to his father.
So Jeep is not his actual name. It is a nickname. What's his real name?
I believe it's Gerard Paul, initials GP, and at some point, somebody, probably him, recounts that his father, when he was a little kid, he was going over and under everything, taking the longest road to get from A to B, and his father nicknamed him Jeep, like he goes off road to get everywhere.
Occasionally, you have somebody call him Gerard, which indicates, kind of a change in mood. So I like that, him having the nickname, but also his real name. Now, the book is called Johnny Careless after the character in the book who's found dead right in the first chapter. So no spoiler here. Why is he called Johnny Careless? Because that's not his full name, accurate name anyway.
His name is is John Chambliss, and he's nicknamed Johnny Careless by at least one guy who's one of his coaches when he's a kid. And in this culture that these guys grew up in, and where Jeep and Johnny meet, you start hockey or lacrosse, soccer, these team sports, ice hockey. You generally start around 6 or 7 years old. And then you go from there into travel teams or your grade school, or in Johnny's case, private school teams, and play it through high school or prep school in Johnny's case. So it's a boyhood where you have your parents, obviously, but you're being dropped off on fields or at practice facilities, and your coaches are your surrogate parents or uncles. And this kid was a privileged pain in the neck. And at some point, some coach said, "Yeah, Johnny Careless," that he didn't really, who he inconvenienced or put a nose out of joint didn't land on him.
Well, and as you tell it, the team that he and Jeep were both on, the lacrosse team, was doing really well and were going to some sort of championship. And
Yeah.
Johnny, they were a great pair together. Johnny drops out with the idea that he has to fly off to Chile, I think.
Yeah.
Has to fly off to Chile in order to keep a family trust provision going to his own benefit. But even though that's a really jerky thing for him to do, there's a little hook in there when she says that Jeep will benefit from that because then all eyes will just be on him, and
Yeah.
he might therefore attract the coach's interest and perhaps get some kind of a financial boost to going to college. So
Yeah.
that seems to be Johnny, that he does all this kind of careless stuff, but then oftentimes there's some kind of bit of altruism or something involved in it. He's a really complicated character.
I hope so. And obviously as you're building a character that who is dead on page two, it I think behooves the writer to have the audience care about this person, even though they're caring about them in the past or only caring about them through the poor friend of his who's left looking for what actually happened to him. But I was um, tried to give him some qualities that the reader would go, oh, I see why Jeep was friends with him. I see that if you really knew him, he wasn't careless. He just could appear that way to the people he wasn't particularly close to or particularly cared what they thought. But his friends and his loved ones, he cared very much what they thought.
The best of crime fiction, or there's a murder that occurs, because not all crime fiction is about murder. There,
Right.
plenty of other opportunities for theft or fraud or whatever. But I've always thought that the best of the murder mysteries are ones in which you mourn the victim. That the victim isn't just, some kind of stick figure there to serve the plot, but there are people that care about him, and you, the reader, know enough about him or her to care
Yeah.
about him. I thought you did a really good job with that, all the way through the book, because we don't really know Johnny till the very end of the book.
No, he's a refracted character. We know him through his mother, his father, Niven, who becomes his wife, and his friend Johnny, his friend Jeep. And it's different lenses that we see him through. But hopefully for the reader, the audience, they get a three-dimensional picture of the guy.
So set the opening chapter for us, because you get right to it in terms of somebody dying.
There's this local police chief who's new to his job. I think he's been there for 4 or 5 months. Jeep Mullane is called to a scene of a body is washed up on a local beach, and that it is in his jurisdiction. And he arrives there, and the EMTs are pulling the body out of the water. And one of the Tex points out that the guy has a small tattoo on his ankle, and Jeep goes, the audience hears him say this, the other people don't. He recognizes the tattoo and identifies the victim in his mind, and we find out in the next chapter that he has the exact same tattoo. And we go back into the past and the two of them at 15 or 16 on the night they got the tattoo.
So I like the way you do this. We're only on page 3. Jeep leaned over just above the ankle bone, an inch or so square, a tattooed X in green ink, the borders blurred by the years. Jeep stood up straight, sucked down another breath, and positively ID'd the deceased, but just to himself. I
Yeah.
mean, I do think that you paint that with words sparingly, but very effectively. The
Thank
other
you.
thing I think is a great strength of the book, another thing, not the other thing, is Long
There's
Island.
only one other thing. You're absolutely right.
Sorry, took me a moment there to catch myself. You're not the first author I have read who writes about Long Island and the way that the original small farmers and so forth on Long Island have been gentrified and shoved out, so to speak, or their lives have been upended by the wealth, the enclaves and so forth. And in this book, you straddle those two parts of Long Island. You've got the of which Johnny is part,
Yeah.
a really rich part. And then you've got Jeep, who, what would we call him? Middle class? I mean, he's not poor.
Yeah, he's the son of a cop, and the town, I describe it as best I can, and I live here, by the way, most of the time, and he lives in there's a couple of towns, the one that Jeep lives in and was raised in is Bayville, and it's a small stretch of middle class houses, mostly cops, firemen, plumbers, bordered by Center Island to the east, which is a very wealthy enclave, and Laddingtown and Locust Valley to the west. So in between is a little island where a guy like Jeep would grow up if he lived in that area. And it goes, honestly, it goes back to, and I thought of this, not that there's any comparison between these two books, believe me, but The Great Gatsby is set exactly in this area. And was published 100 years ago this year, and has a similar, to me, Fitzgerald through Nick Carraway, his narrator and kind of protagonist, was had his nose pressed to the glass. There's a sense of when you live around here or in Beverly Hills or the Hamptons or wherever it is that you identify as this kind of area, there's a sense of, gosh, what's that like at that party or in that place or over the fence or over there? And I think that that dynamic is a push-pull that hopefully serves the novel.
Well, there's tension between the aspirational and the haves.
Yeah.
Um, I I not know that, lots of people really just think of Long Island as, the Hamptons and wealth and all the rest of it. And I don't remember who it was I first read that pointed out to me, because I grew up in Chicago. I grew up in Winnetka and then came west. So
Yeah.
my husband grew up on Park Avenue. So he kind of didn't know it either. But
Yeah.
anyway, the surprise was that it was small farmers. I mean, it was very rural, very small farmy.
Yep.
And those people gradually had much of their life eroded by all the people who came in. And, I mean, we're going through that in Scottsdale to a great degree, that, and especially the poorer communities are
Yeah.
being eroded by developers and so forth. It seems like any place that is desirable, somehow people come in and then crowd out the original people that left, that lived there.
In the 1920s, the wealthy New Yorkers in boats, and as the roads were built and the railroads came out, and I think it's a lot of the families that came out in the 1920s are still around here. It became a legacy place to live as well as, but a lot of them came in and paid off the farmers, and the farmers went kind of willingly. So I think there's a little bit of it gets misconstrued or simplified over the years, but whether it's the Hamptons and the potato farmers and the fishermen, at a certain point, and one can only imagine that if you've been farming potatoes for 3 generations and somebody comes along and offers you 100 generations worth of money to stop farming potatoes and just move, yeah, you're probably going to take you're probably going to take the money very gladly. And where we live around here, it's what happened. There were Quaker farmers with asparagus and potatoes and a few other things, and these guys came out to build estates, paid them off, and off they went.
It's interesting you say 1920s. I hadn't thought about that either, but Newport was really a Gilded Age, 1880s,
Yes.
90s kind of a thing.
Yep.
Then, there's the whole area in Maine that has become Acadia National Park. That was another
Yes.
big thing. I hadn't thought about that. Maybe Long Island was desirable because those other places had already been built up and built over.
Perhaps, or it was closer to New York.
Well,
Yeah.
there's certainly that. Actually, we were on a cruise down the Inland Waterway last spring, and we stopped at Jekyll Island, as those things do, so you can get
Sure.
off and look at stuff. And in the conversation about those palatial homes there, it came out that at one point in the Gilded Age, 1/6 of the world's wealth lived on Jekyll Island in the
Wow.
winter. I know. And so I don't think that's ever been true of Long Island. I think it's been far more
No,
diffuse.
it's very diverse and very, but there are pockets of it. Famously, the Hamptons, which everybody's heard of, and for a long time now. The North Shore. If you go back, Fitzgerald was writing about the North Shore, and the wonderful late Nelson DeMille wrote a book
Yeah.
called The Gold Coast with a follow-up called The Gatehouse
Right.
that were painting the picture of exactly these towns, villages, streets, beaches.
You know, I thought when I was reading your book, how much Nelson, who was a very good friend, how much Nelson would have enjoyed it. I'm sorry we lost him before, last year before this published, because I think he would have been an enthusiastic reader for you. Anyway, tension, conflict is one of those things that builds a great crime novel or thriller. And so I mentioned all this about the different economic and social classes because that does, in fact, is a way to introduce more tension. I mean, sometimes it's sexual, sometimes it's parent-children, sometimes it's money. In fact, it's all of those things as a general rule. And you draw upon all of them. So we have Jeep, who's now identified this body. And if I remember right, the face has largely been
Yeah.
obliterated. The rest of the body's not in too bad shape, but the face is kind
It looks like he got hit by a boat or backed into by a propeller, whatever it is. But the conventional wisdom is immediately he was out swimming, either or he fell off a boat or he's out
of
swimming and got hit by something.
right.
And Jeep is the only one on the scene who knows him for most of his life and goes, "Ah, he wasn't a guy to go out swimming alone at night." And when they find where his car is and his clothes, and it became clear that he did go swimming, there are things that don't add up for Jeep. There are cops who are drawn a little bit as, you know what, go play over there. We got this. Older, wiser, more cynical one, a Detective Arbogast, who is that older guy who's just trying to get through the day and get through the year and get to his pension. And so that's a natural, I'm going to say, cop trope of you got the guy who's just trying to get to retirement and the younger guy is going, no, no, we got to do more here, you know?
Yep. Another source of conflict in novels, to have
Yeah.
jurisdictional or personality disputes between the investigators that works out super well. Um, it comes up, so often. Sometimes the local cops butt up against the FBI or,
Yeah.
one guy, Bosch is so much like that. And I thought you did that really well. And I particularly liked the older cop that you just mentioned, one of the no, I can't do spoilers, but one of the best parts about the book is in fact the older cop and Jeep, how they work out their relationship.
Yeah.
So Jeep falls into the unhappy duty of having to inform Johnny that Johnny's family,
Yeah.
that Johnny has died, and that he's not entirely comfortable, I think, with the wasn't necessarily an accident, as everybody would like to have it ruled. But you can't just have one track to make a great novel. So, meantime, there is another thread, another thing to investigate. And is that something you've actually run into in Long Island? I know it's existed in other places.
When we were talking at the top of our time together here, we're talking about coming from police and being around police work and a lot of police stuff doing the Blue Bloods television show. Yes, it is completely based in fact. It's been going on for a while. For the audience, there is a syndicate that works the New York metro, the wealthy areas of the New York metropolitan area, identifying, driving around, identifying high-end motor vehicles, taking pictures of them, sending them to their bosses. The boss say, "Yep, get that one," and they follow it home, or they see that it's been left open because the cops describe the side view mirrors being out as being like open arms to thieves. So long story short, it's a plague around here for a while, and in Southwest Connecticut and Westchester County around New York, where they get the cars, they drive them straight to the port of Newark, straight onto a container, which gets loaded onto a ship, and it's out of town, sometimes before the guy even knows that his car was stolen. So when I got onto that through researching, I thought I got to have something else in this book that's an actual ongoing crime story. Just a dead body's going to be 46 pages. Um, I researched that with the Nassau County Police and especially the local police around here because and then these are pristine, lovely little villages with windy roads. And you are forbidden as a police officer to pursue a vehicle, a stolen vehicle, because you may cause an accident, you may hit a bystander, et cetera, et cetera. So the cops' hands are tied in that sense and by the court system. So it became a really, to me, pretty chewy police story because the police are the ones wearing the handcuffs in crimes like that.
Indeed. Actually, there have been several books in a sort of similar idea, not necessarily cars, but
I
more like,
promise I didn't read them.
no,
This
no, 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 not house break-ins, but the common thread is that it isn't that they come up from Chile.
Yeah.
That there seems to be a kind of Chilean crime syndicate thing that sends people up into the US and they either burgle houses or steal cars or whatever. And I gather it's a real thing. I'm trying to remember who it was I last read that talked about that. Right. But anyway, I guess it's a real thing, you know.
It's a real thing. It's a thorny thing in the day and age and climate. It certainly was. I ended up making the choice to keep it as it was in real life because it was so well known in real life with the people I was talking to. But yes, anytime you're writing fiction and you identify one ethnic group as being responsible for this crime wave or something, you're getting into an area that you didn't particularly want to get into. In this case, I had to make the choice to sort of do it without going overboard with it. You know,
No,
we never really get to know the guys who are doing it. Only one who ends up being integral to the lives of both Johnny and Jeep.
yeah, well, I thought you did it well, and it's certainly believable that the area that you're describing has enough valuable cars,
Yes, it
to
does.
to make it a natural place for these guys to go boosting them and getting
I-
them to the port.
it's a supermarket. It really is. So
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I hadn't really thought about how the port of Newport made it so easy. That it was.
Newark, not Newport, though it would be interesting to
Sorry,
drive expensive cars to Newport and put
right.
them on.
Sorry, I've been in and out of Newark, but only the
It's
airport.
okay. Yeah,
So
yeah,
I actually have lived through the remodeling of the Newark airport, which was not a lot of fun.
yeah.
But I like it now. It's a nice approach if you fly in from Phoenix to fly into Newark, and then you can drive up the Hudson if
Yeah.
you are inclined to go north. And you haven't run into mystery conferences yet, but there's an annual one called BoucherCon, named after a New York Times critic called Anthony Boucher. Nobody
Sure.
knows how to pronounce it. But anyway, it's sort of the international crime gathering. And some years ago, a long time ago, it was in Albany, where
Uh-huh.
I had never been. And so of the various choices to go to Albany, it clearly looked best to fly to Newark and
Right.
drive up the Hudson, which is beautiful and scenic. I really enjoyed it. And then to make it better, we went on to Montreal and took a cruise down the St. Lawrence. So Albany is not a place I would choose to spend a lot of time.
I think I think everybody feels that way.
But nonetheless, I just flew back from Quebec, and you go through Newark. So I spent a lot of time in Newark, but I've also been to Newport.
Uh,
And maybe at my age, I'm just slurring words. Who knows? It's hard to say. Anyway, I guess a great question would be, did you have such a good time doing this that you might want to do it again if your time permitted?
it's a very good question. I would love to do it again. I'm in the middle of doing it again. I've been writing a sequel to it for a few months now. I had written, I'd started another one. The TV show I worked on, Blue Bloods, which I'm sure some of your audience has seen, um, ended its 14
Right.
season run in July, and we aired the last one in December. But since July, I haven't been there. There wasn't any network TV show to run, so I started to think about another Jeep Mullane story. Very specifically, he's still the police chief of Center Brookville, and had an idea and wrote a few chapters and shared it with my agent, who shared it with the wonderful Deb Futter at the Celadon imprint of Macmillan. I'm giving her a shout out, A, because it's publication day of my first book, and she bought the second or contracted for a second one based on the first few chapters. So yes, I'm doing that, and I do enjoy it a lot. I do. I miss being around crews. I miss being around actors, and I'm sure there's lots of budding writers out there or professional writers out there. The other hard thing about going from plays, screenplays, teleplays is that you don't have actors. Previously, everything you were writing, you knew was going to be brought to witty, sexy, good-looking fruition, three dimensions by actors and actresses. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to write to and for if they're pleasant actors and actresses, but it can become a crutch. But it's what I always did. Um, so going and being alone in a room and making stuff up is obviously the job of a writer as well as a crazy person, but is I miss the mix of people. Um,
Oh, let's be real. Having read this, it isn't that hard to envision it as a screenplay or turned into a screenplay. And I didn't have any sense that you wrote it in order to have it turn into, a
no,
film.
I did not.
But on the other hand, I could certainly see it. It's a book. I mean, I'm not a particularly visual person in the sense that when I read a story, it's running through my head like a screenplay. But in
Right.
this one, I did actually have kind of that experience where I thought you're so good the way you painted things that I could envision it in front of me. And therefore, it strikes me that this could well, maybe it already has been optioned to turn it into.
Not yet, and not yet. So if somebody wants to, that would be great. But this on again, I'll just on this publication day to have a book coming out. It's the first time, and I've been writing for 44 or 45 years. It's the first thing I've put out to the public that, for better or for worse, is just me.
Well, there you are. And you've had a very kind reception. I mentioned my friend Mr. Sandford, but you've also had some wonderful reviews. And, to get that kind of attention for a first novel doesn't happen that often. I mean, part of it goes down to Celadon, Deb Futter, and her
Yeah,
team here.
yeah,
And part of it, of course, is that you already have some kind of a profile, whether, you haven't just emerged from teaching second grade or something, which is an admirable thing, but nonetheless is not a
yes,
platform.
yeah.
So, you have a lot of things going for you. And one of them, of course, is this really good book. So, Patrick, why don't you pop in and tell us if you have anything to add? Patrick does a lot of interviews with people like Walter Mosley, who's,
Oh gosh, yeah.
we've had Elmore Leonard here.
Oh, God's sakes.
My
Now you've got me. This is
We had a whole day with Elmore Leonard. I should add that my late sister, sadly, my late sister, was the chief curator of film at MoMA.
Oh,
So,
really? Okay.
yeah, you might have met her, Mary Lee Bandy.
I don't know that I ever met her, but I do know that she did a wonderful job.
She did do a wonderful job, which the museum has continued. But as a consequence, um, we were able to bring her and Elmore Leonard out. Remember, Patrick?
Yeah, that was so fun.
It was
Oh,
really
I
great.
bet.
Um,
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
It was a conference that we did that was mystery or crime writers who also write in the Western genre.
Right.
We had Leonard, we had Joe Lansdale, We had
Bill,
Was
Bill,
Lauren Estelman here? I can't remember.
I don't think Lauren was there. It was Bill, whatever his name was from Texas, who wrote Bill Kreider. Remember
Bill
him?
Kreider, yep.
Ton. Yeah, but I mean, Elmore Leonard is so iconic.
Yeah.
It was really a treat to be able to spend a day with him. I also, always kind of liked his philosophy that, the book was yours. And then I think he likened it to a car. Was it Elmore Leonard that did? He said it was like a car, while it was yours, you drove it. And then when you sold it, somebody else got to drive it. And you didn't have to spend any no angst about,
Right.
And other people say that regardless of how the film treatment goes, the book is still the book, which has been
Yeah.
comforting to some people who haven't had a particularly sympathetic. Michael Conley did his first ever book event with us and says he will do
Uh-huh.
his last ever book event, and terrified us year before last by sitting down and saying, I thought this was going to be my last book event. And we all went, I mean, we're like 600 people there. We're all going,
Yeah.
and then he said, but I made a decision. He said, I don't need to be in Hollywood. There's a great team. They've got everything going. Bosch will be coming to an end, whatever. They don't need me.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to go back and write my books because I
Oh,
can't do
great.
it anymore. And thank
Well,
God he did. In fact, he has a new book with a new character coming out in May, as
wow.
well as whatever his regular thing is he's going to do
Yeah.
this fall. So that's really exciting.
Yeah.
And then Patrick has him, we're hosting something for him in March. Who's he with?
He's with yeah, he's going to be hosting a true crime book that a detective named Rick Jackson, longtime now retired, but LAPD detective, who was not it's not the basis for Bosch particularly, but he was one of them. There were a couple of LA detectives who really inspired the character of Harry Bosch and worked with has worked with Mike for many years, during research. So anyway, Rick Jackson he's written his first true crime book, and along with another gentleman, and then Mike's going to come over and host it. So that should be exciting.
I'm watching.
Yeah, and then the Renee, I'd love to get the woman who inspired the character of Renee Ballard is also an LAPD cop, and she's a yeah, real interesting person, and it'd be fun to have her out here too at some point.
Patrick, you just made me realize I forgot to ask you a question, Kevin, which is there in fact a real life inspiration for Jeep, or did you make him up wholly out of whole cloth?
I made him up out of whole cloth, but I also made him up out of I worked closely with a for 14 years with an ex NYPD detective named Jim Nusiforo, who was our tech advisor on Blue Bloods and is one of the great storytellers I've ever met. And so what Jimmy told stories over those 14 years, he was often the self-deprecating center of these action police stories. And I took a lot from him. So I met some cops, and obviously, having been a screenwriter, I had certain. If I were writing for actors, what does this guy look like? What does he sound like? Is he young Jack Nicholson? Is he this? So it was a compendium of stuff, but a lot of the fabric of him, the character of him, came from Jimmy or guys that Jimmy described or partners with or whatever. So yeah, a lot of it kind of came from real life once removed.
They also guided you on police procedurals,
Yes.
procedure, because
Yep.
you can bluff it sort of, but in an increasingly critical world, you kind of have to get the procedure right.
You got to get that. So I had the Nassau County Police Commissioner Pat Ryder, a local police chief named Kenny Lack, and they were very helpful. And I could go to them and say, "Here's what I want to happen. Here's the way I'm thinking about it. Tell me where I'm right and where I'm wrong." And they would sort of reverse engineer it. So I tried to make it so that if and when a police officer in 2025 reads this, he won't slap his forehead and go, that could never happen. You try to at least preclude that happening.
Anything you'd like to ask from the audience, Patrick?
Well, our friend Stefania is tuning in after a conspicuous absence. She's back, but her question I think you've actually already addressed, which is what are some of the differences between writing for the screen and writing in this long form?
Yeah.
So
It
you,
was really is the two that I mentioned, the amount of words, 7,000 or 8,000 versus 70 or 80,000 words. And no actors, which is it might not seem it might not be apparent to the casual observer, but it's enormously different when you have come to rely on you mostly write dialogue. 90% of what you're doing, obviously you're making up a story, but you're telling the story through dialogue or laying out for the director and the cinematographer to make three-dimensional for an audience. A screenplay and a play and a teleplay are never meant to be read. They're not literary creations. You would never, rarely do you publish them for the reading public.
are they
Um,
kind of like schematics?
they're blueprints. Yes,
Yeah.
they're schematics. That's exactly right, Patrick. So it was that and taking on the painting an entire character or set of characters and their sexiness and their danger and their lovability and their wit and all of that stuff purely by words in 12-point font in black and white.
Was
So
it a challenge for you to, I was just going to say to write descriptions, set, put forth a setting and describe it, because that's largely something that you haven't really had to do, correct?
Very correct. And what at the top of the thing we were talking about, doing the jobs of the people you used to collaborate with. It used
Hmm.
to be the DP, the director of photography's job, or the cinematographer's job. Like, what do we need to see in this scene? Where do we want the audience eye to rest for a moment? When do we need to be close in on this character? It's also the editor's job. So
It's
yeah,
not
that
exterior, outside, that kind of thing. You've got to flesh it out a bit.
you've got to flesh it out and you've got to give the reader just enough of what they need without doing 2 pages about the living room curtains.
Right. It's a
And that also
fine
goes back
balance.
to the Elmore Leonard of it, just skip, leave out the parts the audience tends to skip over. If you've got 3 paragraphs about a meal, they're probably on to the next page.
Right. Right. Well, did you kind of have you always been a crime fiction fan? And who are some of your favorites? We mentioned
Some of the ones
Leonard
we've
before.
talked about, certainly Michael Connolly,
Hmm.
um, Dennis Lehane,
Mm.
Robert B. Parker, also, and at Carl Hyacin. And I would just point out that also these uh, fellows, and there's a couple of women I'd like to name. Um, they also write about the place where their protagonist lives, the tribes that commit the crimes or are the victims of the crimes where their protagonists live. So Carl Hyacin has Florida. Lehane and Parker had Boston. Connolly, Chandler had Los Angeles. Joe Wambaugh, who we mentioned, and a lot of other people have Los Angeles. Um, I just loved what they did, and I think if I were to, the number one for me is John D. McDonald and the Travis McGee series, because he's not really a cop, he's not really a detective, and if you haven't read them out there, and I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, pick one up and you'll read the rest of them. Written in the 60s and 70s, and it's a guy who is lives on a houseboat and is a strong, smart, wily guy and goes out and if he solves your crime, he's recovering some sort of bounty and he keeps 50%. And they're wonderful. McDonald gave himself the latitude for him to be both a cop and a private eye and a mob enforcer, whatever he needed to be in the story he could be. And I
A
love
bit
that.
of Henry David Thoreau too at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah, he'd stop and explain how
Yeah.
the ecology was being disrupted by the developers, and it's just great stuff. He paints a wonderful, wonderful 3 dimension of this man and his world.
a new woman every book.
Every book.
At least one,
Yep.
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Which sort of,
yeah,
made it really fun too. It was like a whole reset
yeah.
every time you went on with McDonald. He gets reprinted from time to time. And, Patrick and I, like to try to remind people because there's a new generation of readers coming along all the time,
Yeah.
He
about,
gets reprinted, and I can think of two right now, and I think it's Carl Hyacin did the foreword to the first reprint, and Lee Child, the editor, the writer, obviously, of the Reacher series, did a beautiful foreword for the second reprint. So they're both covering the same why I love this guy and the influence he had on me by two very accomplished, very idiosyncratic themselves contemporary writers.
Did
my
you,
theory is
are
that
you a
every
fan of
20
Richard
years,
Stark? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Pat, I was just going to say, my theory is that every 20 years we get a generational role, and it's great to bring back the basics of crime. I did an event last night all about Agatha Christie with a new author, but the new author draws upon Christie, her travels, her tropes, or whatever it is.
Right.
And a new reader, if you've never read Agatha Christie, would benefit from that, but still wouldn't really appreciate it to the degree that somebody who has read it. So
Right.
people who read some of the authors that you've cited will come to your books, with a different perspective than
Yep.
people who haven't. I'm sorry, Patrick, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. I'm trying to remember what I was going to go for. No, I was just going to ask, are you a fan of Richard Stark? The novels of Richard Stark? Do you know those?
I know his name, but I don't know his novels. No. Sure.
I bet you would love those. I mean, they're talk about economy of words.
Yeah.
And it was a pen name of Donald Westlake,
Oh, okay.
who wrote
Yes.
these
Yep.
great caper novels and all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
But then his alter ego was this character, Richard Stark. And
Right.
he wrote like 20 of these, and they're like 140 pages, just lean and mean. And
Just like his name, Richard
yes, exactly.
It's one,
Stark.
Exactly.
And the guy, he was the pen name for, and was that the racetrack mysteries and stuff?
no, that's Dick Francis. No,
That's Dick Francis.
yeah,
Sorry, Donald
no, the
Westlake.
Richard
Yes.
Stark is one of the is the as we call it, he wrote from the wrong end of the gun. Stark is a bad guy. He's a bank
Uh-huh.
robber. But and it's sort of like Larry Block and his whole burglar series. And so it's great when you've got somebody like that and they get caught up in a crime. A lot of the action is for them to stay out of jail while they're also trying to work
Uh-huh.
out, I mean, the burglar was forever being caught somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, and a dead body would, unhappily be in the same place, and then what? Um,
Uh-huh. He better
it's
find
a
out.
really,
He's in the tradition of the gentleman burglar kind
yeah.
of
Mhm.
thing. Um,
Arsène
right.
Lupin, which is
Yeah.
on TV right now. Arsène Lupin is a French version of that kind of thing. I wanted to give a shout out to Stefania. Patrick mentioned her because she watches from Italy, and to do that, she stays up way too late to watch our
Oh.
program. So,
Yeah.
Buenos Aires, Stefania. Anything else, Patrick?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it is interesting looking in the 60s. You mentioned Travis McGee. Once the counterculture starts to take hold in the 60s and Vietnam War and all that, there's this era where suddenly the cops aren't the good guys,
Yeah. Yep.
suddenly the focus is on the quote bad guy.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
we're
But
somewhat back in that again. So,
Yes.
for George Floyd, it's become more of a problem. I would
yeah.
like to wind up with reading part of the marvelous review that Kevin got from Publishers Weekly, one of the oracles of the book world, and it touches on things we've just talked about. It ends its review by saying Wade's gift for suspense is as well honed as one would expect from his film and TV credits. The real surprise is his character work, which goes deep enough that readers will find themselves thinking about Jeep and Johnny long after they've turned the final page. Haunting and heartbreaking. This is a winner. And this is a heartbreaking book. It really is. You will be surprised by the end, and you will also really be touched by it. So marvelous job, Thomas.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You are entirely welcome. So thank you, all of you who've watched it. As Patrick mentioned, we have some signed copies left.
Yep.
for a book called Johnny Careless. Expect to see more of Kevin and Johnny. No, not Johnny. Johnny's dead. More of Kevin and more of Chief. Got to get that straight. Anyway,
Spoiler alert.
it was a real pleasure. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in. Patrick, Barbara, thank you so much for having me. It was
It
just
was
great.
great. Good night, everyone.
Congratulations.